Hello everyone, welcome to today's session of the Institute of Managers and Leaders webinar series. We're absolutely delighted to have you here for what I'm sure will be another fantastic session. I'm Jason Goodall, I'm Corporate Solutions Manager for New South Wales and the ACT. Today's session, I think it's really an important one. It's about getting the best out of your people. I think something as leaders we all seeking to do. And today we're going to be talking about getting the best out of your team through using positive psychology and that great challenge of leadership, emotional intelligence. So hopefully today we're going to be delivering you 5 ways to develop your personal leadership skills and using positive leadership to get the best out of your people. Now, obviously this feeds into the IML competency framework. Excuse me. The framework recognises the different layers within leadership, and obviously as with all IML programs, webinars, and professional development events, we're seeking to develop all of those competencies. The webinar today should last for roughly 45 minutes with about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. No need to take notes. I will be sending you a recording of the webinar after the event, and any of the resources that you might be interested in that Gina mentions in today's webinar, we can provide those on request. And that brings me nicely to Gina. Gina has been an L&D consultant for many companies. She has worked, and then in 2004 decided to strike out on her own as a consultant. Basically, Gina has a keen interest in helping leaders apply the principles of positive psychology and emotional intelligence. Excuse me. She strives to deliver strategies and tools that inspire action and, most importantly, encourage employee engagement. So she obviously has all the experience we need for today's session. And Gina also thrives off challenging and changing attitudes towards people development and work, which is something that I think we all need. So I'll hand over to Gina. Gina.
Great, thanks, Jason. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me today, and thanks for that nice introduction to David. Positive leadership is what we're about, in particular, positive leadership behaviours. And I guess this came out of something that I hear a new leader say particularly very often, and that is that they go from team member 1 minute and leader the next. And it is a really big change of expectation, particularly expectation around behaviours and the type of behaviours that leaders are expected to demonstrate. And of course, those that get the best out of your people. And for a lot of people, it's quite a big change, and they're not very confident with the leadership behaviours. So I certainly recommend, and I do advise people that if you're interested, or not, even if you're not interested in the leadership track, instilling some of these behaviours in your day-to-day work and creating these positive leadership habits, whether you're a leader or not, is a great way to start to demonstrate to people that, this is who I am and this is what we're about. A key thing around people and being influenced by leaders is they like to predict behaviour. So if your behaviour moves around too quickly or shifts too quickly, people are not used to it, and then it can start to take a bit of time to re-establish trust, particularly if you're a team member that's going into a team leader role with the same team, or would just see you from that perspective. So in today's session, we're going to look at what are some of those sort of behaviours. What are some of those behaviours you can do, whether you're a leader or not, that make a positive impact on others. And so others can see you as the sort of person that they can trust, the sort of person that they connect to and they want to be influenced by. Some of those actions, of course, are the ones that demonstrate more impact on other people and influence team success more. So we're going to have a look at some of those elements that determine team success, and of course some of those personal habits, some of those day-to-day habits that you can role model, particularly if you're a leader or not, in your team to help your team develop some of those same sort of habits. And so as we talk about leadership, we need to also look at a very simple definition, and that is, you know, what makes a great leader? Well, do you need to have a position of leadership or not? I really don't think that you do. But leaders do have willing followers. That's something that all leaders do have, that they have someone that is able to be influenced by their behaviour and follow and role model those sorts of behaviours. So if we think of that as a really simple definition of leadership and what that is, once again, you don't need to have the actual official title as a leader to have people that willingly follow your example or are able to be influenced by you. So step number one, we're going to look at 5 ways. First way really is to look, sound, and do the sorts of things that positive leaders do. And so when you think about that, I want you to consider, you know, some of the best leaders that you've ever come across, whether they are in the media, whether they are in your personal life, whether they are in your professional life, or whether that's even someone that's a colleague of yours. I want you to think about, what do they look like? I want you to think about, you know, what's their body language, what's their presence when they walk into a room, you know, how they walk in. Do they walk in with a positive attitude, or they walk in a little bit of slumped? You know, we know when someone's slumped, we're not looking at that person to influence us when that person doesn't look like they want to be there. So the importance of looking like the sort of leader that you want to be, and of course that means positive body language, and that makes sense, coming in with the same sort of attitude with a nice posture. Of course, what do leaders sound like? Not just in the tone of voice that they use, but the kind of words that they choose to describe things. You know, if a leader is often, or if a person is often talking about everything that's wrong, you can't go from a team member who is, you know, bagging the place to now a leader who's just switched sides all of a sudden and is corroborating the organisation and the organisation strategy. So we want to make sure that people trust the people around you, and that is being clear about what you say and how you say it in a way that is a positive perspective that it brings out, and positive influence. And of course, what does the leader do? And there's some of the other actions that we're about to take a look at. What are the things that leaders do? And it's got to come back to this. To have a positive impact is crucial when you're looking for engaging people. So getting the best out of people does mean demonstrating positive leadership behaviours in everything. So when having a positive impact on another person means that you are demonstrating the things that are beneath the surface that maybe the other person doesn't know about you. Of course, when we demonstrate above the surface what we look like, what we sound like, and the things that we do, help demonstrate what we think, helps to align what our values are and what's truth, the emotions that we're experiencing, how positive we feel, the beliefs that we have about what's the right thing, and how people interact, for example, and of course, our motivation. Now, we know it's a classic one, isn't it? It's difficult to be motivated or engaged when your leader's not. So we know that that's really crucial. And so those things that leaders do that have the most impact on a team's success has been researched, of course. And this is some information from the High Performance Workplace Index that looked at the top 15% of organisations or high-performing organisations in Australia and tried to determine what is it about how the leader interacted with their people that made the most amount of difference. And as you can see here, these are the actions, these are the do's, these are the things that people prioritise. And you can see in the blue, they're the high-performing workplaces and how often the leader demonstrated those sorts of behaviours. And of course, you can see the red of the low-performance workplaces, which you can see people management side, my immediate supervisor prioritises people management as a #1 priority, as a real key differentiator there. How often people are focused on people. So once again, new leader or an established leader, these are the 9, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the 9 elements of what good leaders do, what positive leaders do. So you'll get a recording of this because this is some really good information. Where do I prioritise? Where do I have to put my focus on? The other thing, of course, from the same research, the High Performance Workplace Index, this research conducted by the Australian National University in 2011, they also found that certain emotions that people felt and how often they felt them directly linked to high performance. And as you can see again in this one, people that feel valued or particularly proud more often usually are high performing in their workplaces as well. And so the question then goes, what does it take to make people feel proud of their organisation? And how can you help people establish that, feel that sense of pride? And of course, that could be different things for different people. What people are proud of are usually personally values driven of what makes them proud, but finding out more about what people value and helping them feel proud about the work that they're doing is a really great positive behaviour to have as well. So keeping that one in mind. Now we have to also look at the other element of this, because as you can see, there are some of those negative emotional states on the right-hand side of that spidergram, and you can see how the difference there about how often people are feeling, inadequate, depressed, worried, and anxious, particularly, and fearful. There's a little bit of difference with high-performing workplaces, a bit lower, but not too significantly. So it says to me, it's not that they're not feeling those feelings, is that they just have more of a ratio of their positive emotions. Okay, because some of that is expected in our challenging workplaces. But unfortunately, if we don't remind people or help people feel those feelings of pride and value and optimistic more often, they end up getting caught in the negative. And of course, the negativity bias, which is made famous by Dr. Martin Seligman in his state strategic plan, Building a State of Wellbeing, and in his book called Flourish as well, it's that natural tendency in humans to give more weight to the negative. So when you've had a day at work and you're reflecting on your day, you're more likely to highlight or think about or reflect on, quite naturally, the things that didn't go well, the things that made you feel anxious, worried, and depressed. So sometimes we need some help from the people around us to help us feel those emotions of pride, for example, and optimism, because we can get caught up in the negative. So things to worry about. How do we counteract that? And when you're dealing with emotions of yourself and others, we call that emotional intelligence, of course, the ability to do that. And it is the highest predictor of high performance at work. This is a study, again, that was done by Genos. And so we want to determine, well, what does that mean? What do we need to be able to do to prepare ourselves for leadership, to show positive leadership behaviours when it comes to emotional intelligence? And the great man, Daniel Goleman, of course, is going to give you some information about how that might work. So I'll leave it over to Daniel for a moment.
Emotional intelligence refers to how well we handle ourselves and our relationships. There are 4 domains: self-awareness, knowing what we're feeling, why we're feeling it, which is the basis of, for example, good intuition, good decision-making. Also, it's a moral compass. The second part is self-management, which means handling your distressing emotions in an effective way so that they don't cripple you, they don't get in the way of what you're doing, and yet attuning them to them when you need to so that you learn what you must. Every emotion has a function. Also, marshaling positive emotions, getting ourselves involved, enthused about what we're doing, aligning our actions with our passions. The third is empathy, knowing what someone else is feeling. And the fourth is putting that all together in skilled relationship. So that's what I mean by emotional intelligence. There are many definitions out there. The part of the brain, it turns out that.
So that's a really great video to keep watching. It's a little bit long, so I won't watch all of it, but it was a great introduction to emotional intelligence from the author of Emotional Intelligence, Dan Goleman. And if you're looking for anything to start to develop and to prepare yourself for leadership, that's a good one to do. Because according to the research, emotional intelligence and leadership particularly helps people feel way more engaged by their leaders than other people. You can see in this graph right there that leaders that have overall emotional intelligence scores that exceed 75%, so high in their emotional intelligence skills, are more likely to have people that are engaged. And you can see the difference it makes as soon as we hit below that. So if you're looking to develop your leadership skills, this is a really great place to start. And we also know that the more we're in those positive emotional state, the more productive that you are. This is Sean Aker. He's got a great TED Talk. Again, I recommend you have a look at that one. So that was step one. Really focus on your own emotional intelligence and setting up those positive behaviours and work on the things that leaders actually do. The second thing in our 5 ways, and the second way, is to really be clear on who you are and what you stand for. In order to be able to lead people and have them willing to follow you, they have to trust you. And we trust people that we can predict their behaviour. And what do you stand for really helps to bring clarity to your own decisions, and also helps people to understand and predict what your behaviour would be or what your decisions would be as well. We know how important that is to feel trust to people, that we know what they're going to more likely say yes or no to, for example. So if you do stand for things, then you have to demonstrate them. And this is a great quote from David Morrison, who was Australian of the Year in 2016. He talks about the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And particularly when you are a leader, if those standards, the things that you stand for, are important to you, and particularly to the organisation, of course, then it means communicating them. It means calling them out when necessary, and also rewarding it when it does all align. And ultimately, determining clarity about what you stand for is really about decision making. What do you say yes to, and what do you say no to? Clarity of choice is key. Consistency in how you make your choices is key here too, to establish that influence and that trust. And so for one of the things that I do to help clarify my decisions is I ask myself these 3 questions, particularly around, do I say yes or do I say no? And when do I say no? I say no if the decision doesn't make me proud. And the way I think about that is I think about, would I tell others? Would I share this and go, hey, this is a decision that I make? Would I share that with the people that I know? Is it something that's going to make me feel proud about doing? The second one I think about is, even if the first one's not there, maybe it's helpful. And helpful means that it's a decision that's either going to further your goals or your business goals or somebody else's goals. So it might, for example, put you behind one of your tasks, but might help somebody else deal with their task. And that's the right place to focus on right now. Is it helpful? Does it help someone, something, a customer, business goal, anything? And the third thing, of course, is, does it align with your values? Does it align with what I said is important? Now, that stuff is tough. That consistency particularly gets tough when you are stressed or worried or anxious. So the importance of really managing your own emotional state often, and ensuring that you're doing things to help you be in that positive emotional state more often, does help you provide some clarity around those decisions. So never underestimate that need to take a break to clear my head, or go for a bit of a walk, or take a drink, or vent something to somebody, so then I can come back and determine my decisions. So number one, do what positive leaders do. Number two, know what you stand for, and be consistent in how you demonstrate that. Number three, prioritize your own learning. And my goodness, this can get hard in our busy everyday work, where we do the same things that we've done yesterday tomorrow. Now, sometimes that's good, and actually most times that's okay, but if we just keep doing that, we don't learn, we don't change, we don't improve, and of course the organisation doesn't get the benefit of our learning. So, you know, the great thing about being here today, and certainly recommend the rest of the IML webinars and being part of the networking opportunity, is to keep your learning up to date and keep it going. Lots of expertise around, so you know, think about the sorts of things that you want to get better in. For example, if that was emotional intelligence, you know, read up, talk to people, take a course maybe, find ways to do that. And the success that it can bring you is really quite remarkable. This is some research that was conducted by LinkedIn through its LinkedIn Learning last year, which looked at the difference between how much people learn. And this is amazing to me. You know, we talk about learning, we talk about, oh, how much learning is good. And you can see on the right-hand side some of the differences it makes, depending if you're a heavy learner, and that is you spend more than 5 hours a week learning, or a light learner where you're less than 1 hour a week learning. And it doesn't matter if that learning is part of your job, part of your work, or if it's things that you do in your own time, that ability to learn, particularly some of those ones that I've bolded there, 47% less likely to be stressed at work. So when we think about, again, positive leadership behaviours, what can we do? Learning is a great one, not just to get better knowledge and make better decisions and actually be more effective, but really manage some of that stress. It's when we know better, we do better, we feel more confident in what we're doing, and we're more successful at it. So it does create positive emotions that go along with it, as opposed to even, you know, the medium learners spending between 1 and 5 hours a week are still obviously better off than the light learners, as you can see there. So what you learn then is up to you, but it needs to be something that's helpful. Either stays with you in the work that you're doing, or it's helpful for your future. And it could be anything, but these are the top 10 skills that the World Economic Forum put forward in 2015. And I know it feels like we blink and it's 2020 next year. And some of those key skills in 2020, as you can see, are things like emotional intelligence creeping in there again as a top 10 skill, even cognitive flexibility, which is all about decision making and using your values to align some of those decisions and have a flexible mindset can be really helpful. So picking something there and working on it is probably a great learning outcome for you. So this is what I would do. I'll look at some of those things and go, all right, where do I want to develop first? Take that one and then put together some sort of plan, find books or learning online or asking people, but find different ways to bring that learning into your life. I'm part of a book club. It's really helpful with my learning as well, because it keeps me not just up to date in the work that I do, but it also gives me just enough pressure, if you like, to learn, because part of a book club means someone's going to talk to you about it. So it keeps me updated. Now, that's not the only way to learn, of course, through books and courses, of course, but also by just getting feedback from others. Now, it's a great tool to use to ask people about, how am I going? How was my impact on you? A big one about emotional intelligence is to find out the impact that you're having on other people and determine, is that impact helpful for them in that way? And what sort of behaviours do you need to demonstrate more? you can only do with what you know. And so if you know things, and this is the Johari model of feedback, of course, if you know things that are known by self and known by others, they're open and free. They're things that you are aware of. You know I need to listen better, and other people know I need to listen better too, for example. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff about ourselves that's quite hidden. You know, things that you know about yourself, but sometimes others don't know. A really good example there is some of those values we talked about earlier, you know, the things that you stand for. You know, sometimes people aren't clear on what that is. So you want to be open with that. You want to be clear with not just communicating that to others, but also in symbolizing it through your decision making. Then we've got that blind spot quadrant. That's the one that you really want to uncover more than anything. And they're the things that is unknown to you, but is known by others. And it's usually where you need the most feedback to grow that blind spot. And I'm sure that you know plenty of leaders, and I know plenty of people as well, that can get stuck with that lack of self-awareness of just not understanding the impact that they're having on others, or on their tasks, or on their performance. Finding out more, increasing your learning as well, helps to uncover some of those blind spots. And of course, there's the unknown quadrant, where it's unknown by you and it's unknown by other people. And that's probably stuff you haven't tried yet. You don't know until you give it a go and see how you go. So once again, learning opens up some of those I don't know what I don't know areas to become more known. So keeping it learning. Learning, of course, means having a growth mindset. This is information that comes from Carol Dweck from a book called Mindsets, about the importance of having a growth mindset as a default mindset, because as a growth mindset, you do have that belief, a mindset that goes along with that intelligence can be developed, that you can learn more. It's like being open for learning. You know, if your mind's open, you've got a growth mindset on, you're more likely to take on feedback, you're more likely to embrace challenges, you're more likely to keep persisting in the face of setbacks. You're more likely to see effort as the path to mastery. So put in and experiment and try things out to get better at them. You learn from criticism, like we talked about, and of course you find lessons and inspiration in other people. You see other great leaders and you go, what are they doing? How are they having great influences? So that's a really fantastic way to think about learning from a growth mindset perspective. And what we also know from neuroplasticity is that you don't ever stop learning. As long as your brain is healthy, and it's always pliable, it's always plastic, if you like. You can always create new habits and new changes. So a classic one is, you know, those positive emotional states that we keep talking about. Some people believe, well, that's not me. I just don't feel positive that often. It's my personality. Wrong. It's been proven that those sorts of traits, like how happy you are and how many positive emotions that you do experience, is not necessarily a done deal. It's not stagnant. You can keep improving. Of course, it takes work. Of course, it means reflecting and doing things deliberately and purposely in order to create positive emotional state in yourself, and creating those sorts of habits that create those states and encourage those positive emotions. But if you do the work, you're more likely to create those new neural pathways and create new habits. And then you're in a different way of being as a default state. So more positive as a default. And become more optimistic, which is really quite key, especially in a workplace that's very challenging, to still have that belief that you can do something and things will be okay. To change those habits, there's some work from Charles Duhigg, another good one to have a look at and to follow up with. His book is called The Power of Habits, and he describes it as, you know, understanding what the cue is that encourage certain types of behaviours. It could be, you know, someone saying something or someone doing something, and it usually triggers a sort of behaviour in you. And determining why that behaviour is rewarding. You know, what's the payoff? When I interrupt people when they're talking, for example, what's the reward? Is it for me putting my expressing my point of view across? Is the reward of other people validating my expression? Is that the reward? If I want to change that behaviour, I don't want to interrupt anymore, then we need to try a different behaviour. So the cue is, next time I feel like interrupting, this time I'm going to say, okay, tell me more. Thank you. This is my perspective. So changing that up a little bit. But of course, that takes some time. Charles Duhigg says, have a think about doing these sorts of behaviours, not just every now and then, but as a daily habit, and somewhere between 20 and 200 days, depending on how ingrained that habit is, it would take to change it. But it needs to be purposeful. You need to go in going, every day I'm going to be doing this. This is my new behaviour. Now in the mornings when I get up, I'm going to think of all the great things that happened yesterday to put myself in a positive mood and start my day off with a positive attitude. Cool, so that can go a lot of places. So this is all things that could really help with your learning. So we've got knowing what positive leaders do. We've got being clear with what you stand for and communicating it. We've got learning as being a big part of it. The final one is really, or final couple, is really about number 4, a bit like optimism, but expecting best possible outcomes. Now, this is not just from yourself. Have that expectation that you can achieve your best work, you can be your best version of yourself, but also expecting it from other people. It's called having an optimistic explanatory style. So having higher expectations for yourself and high expectations from others. And the research for this and the for this comes from Kim Cameron's book, Positive Leadership, Strategies for Extraordinary Performance. And they did things like, you know, watch people 10-pin bowling. And there's a group that they get shown videos afterwards, after their training session, of all the times where they missed, where they didn't get the strikes. The other team was shown videos of only strikes. So this is what you looked like when you were, you know, completing strikes. Now, of course, from both groups, the people that were shown videos of only their successes learnt more and changed their habits quicker and more effectively than people that were shown just when they missed. So positive practices is all about expecting the best possible outcome on a day-to-day basis, having high expectations. The other thing that it shows here, as you can see in the graph, is that the cortisol levels, which is our stress indicators, they are really much lower in a group that's been exposed to positive practices than a group that hasn't. And you can see how they both experience the same stressor, an event that causes them stress, but they recover quicker and they recover better and they don't get escalated so much. So really useful, these positive leadership practices, not just for your own self and how you deal with stress, but for the people around you as well. And a great way to do that is to really focus on things like positive communication. And Barbara Fredrickson and John Gottman as well, called the Gottman method, and Barbara Fredrickson has a very similar positivity ratio that she uses, talks about good relationships or positive communication being a great precursor to good, effective, trusting relationships. And of course, as a leader or a potential leader, you want to have those sorts of relationships. And so this is a recommended ratio. And the recommended ratio is about having 5 positive communication interactions with people versus every 1 negative. So we've had a good conversation. It doesn't mean we talk only about good things. It just means it was a positive conversation. And we know that because it felt positive. It created positive emotions as a result of that interaction. So someone walks away feeling good, right? Or at least the same if they were feeling good already. The negative interaction, the one negative interaction obviously is the opposite, that post-interaction someone feels worse than before. So that's a really great way to think about, you know, the relationships that you currently have in your teams and in your organisation, and whether you need to maybe up the ratio a little bit. Reminds me sometimes about my partner as well. I need to do a little bit more of the 5, but that's okay. The kids as well, right? Yeah, all works the same. And the last one, number 5. Be your best version of yourself. Make that your default. Bring it out more often. You know, keep your energy high. When you embrace learning and you learn fast and you do things and you focus on relationships, focus on those emotions, they create and they become part of you. Being your best is a choice that you make. It's the choice that you make to focus on PIN. And that means keep your personal self up to date. Focus on your emotions, focus on your learning, ensuring that you're doing the right things and doing what you stand for. I is influencing other people. Focus on that. When you bring out your best, you're more likely to be able to influence somebody else. So really create that as a core focus. What can I do to positively influence this person? Whether that's communication or need higher expectations. And lastly, the thing that we do, not just for learning, but from our day-to-day in relationships, is network. Great leaders network. They don't just speak to the people in their industry, they have conversations with people from other industries, from other walks of life. And it reminds me of this quote from Jim Rohn: you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so if that's you in the middle, think about the people you're spending the most time with. Do you need to really change that up sometimes? Are there people in your network that you might need to focus more on or focus less on? Maybe you need a role model. And gosh, I recommend every leader has a mentor, someone that they can go to, that they can gain advice from, and that does prioritise their development. That's what we're after. You know, learn as much as you can, meet people. IML has a great opportunity to network as well with others, and find that it also helps you stay in that positive leadership practices place more often. And so that's the last thing I want to leave you with. You know, who are your 5 people? You know, where do you want to learn? What are the habits that you want to change now if you're not an official leader? But what can you do now to create some of these positive leadership practices before you need to? So it becomes just part of your default behaviour and bringing your best self more often. So I hope you do something. Something is better than nothing. It doesn't matter which one of those practices you put into place. Find something, choose something, because if nothing has changed, then nothing changes. Thank you. I'm going to take over to Jason. Hopefully we have some questions.
Yeah, we do. Thanks for that, Gina. That was really good, really good. I love that last piece of advice. For you, really, it's all about you doing something. You know, if not, like, nothing changes unless you change. That's, you know, probably the best advice I think you could walk away from with that one. But there was some excellent stuff in there, some really, really good tips but we can all take back to the workplace. But yes, we have had some questions. A couple that are, you know, that kind of feed off each other, and a lot of focus on that emotional intelligence piece, which I think, as I said in my intro, it's probably the hardest part for a leader, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
To really get their head around and then know what to do to move forward, yeah?
Yeah, and that, oh gosh, that is the one recommendation. If leadership is something that you want to or not want to do, it just emotional intelligence creates such a positive impact in all areas of our life that working on that, developing that, focusing on that, creating those habits is the number one thing we can do to really improve our quality of life anyway. But when it comes to leadership, it becomes crucial. It's critical to a leader's role. So being able to develop that now or anytime means you're much more prepared for the leader's role.
Excellent. Yeah, it's certainly the thing that we keep hearing most when we ask about what are the things that you need to see your leaders develop. It's emotional intelligence is almost inevitably in the top three there. So we have had a question from Lana. Lana asks, are there a few initial steps that I can take to introduce developing emotional intelligence in my workplace?
Absolutely.
Any beginner steps for us?
Beginner steps. Well, have a look at some of the information from in your resources. So as I shared with Daniel Goleman, he's got lots of videos to give you a bit of an idea of what that is. But there's a few things that for an organisation to take the first steps, I'd start. And number one, really start with, what's the emotional climate like? We saw that spider diagram about, how often are people feeling what they're feeling. So having a way to collect that information is a really great place to start to determine, what's the emotional state most common in my workplace, and then use that as a step to introduce, first of all, self-awareness. Let's really be clear about the impact our behaviours are having, not just on ourselves, but on other people. Self-awareness means being aware of the learning that you have to do, that need for development. I often work with engineers and lawyers, and I bring them up for a reason, and that's because quite often they're unaware of what the impact of their emotional intelligence could be. And of course, you can do some really great assessments. Genos has a fantastic assessment for that to help gain that self-awareness of what are my behaviours like? How often am I demonstrating them? So that's a really great place to start, is know what it is and measure what it is. And then number two is then to work on developing those areas where it's not demonstrated more often. So now we know better, we can do better. And instilling some of those positive leadership behaviours more often, that's usually the case, is the next step. So doing actually, I know IML runs some courses. I know doing some courses or finding ways to develop that is fantastic. And step three, just keep measuring it, keep getting that feedback from people around you. How's it going? Is it working? Reflect on today. Did I do things that I was proud of today? Did I do some of those positive leadership practices? Do I need to change it up for tomorrow and do something different?
Yep, excellent. And I think that sort of leads into the next one of the other questions we've had from Kathy. From Warren. How do you get honest, constructive feedback from other people? I think you mentioned the tools like Genos. It's a really good anonymous way to do that.
I think
but
it's important.
Outside of a tool, is how would you set up an environment where people can provide constructive feedback?
Yeah, so it goes with the other, doesn't it? We can be more honest and more constructive in our feedback when we've got good trust and good relationships. Simply asking is great. I remember a boss I used to have really taught me this years ago. I'm talking about, late 90s kind of thing, that would ask every month during our conversations, so what am I doing? How else can I be helping you? And the first few times was like, nah, it's all good, it's great. And then later on, she kept asking, and then she kept prodding. She goes, no, so I've heard from some others that it'd be useful for me too, la, 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 la. How does that work for you? So it gave me a little bit of permission to slowly build that trust that not only did she take that on board and demonstrate that she was open to it, she did change those behaviours. It was really open and transparent, I'm going to do these things differently. And so the next month I was much more open in our conversation about giving that feedback. It takes a little while, but I would start with an anonymous survey or using some of those, the Genos assessment tool in particular, that helps gain that feedback from people.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Good stuff. And again, it's like people are reading our minds. We're feeding into the feeding in the conversation here. How do you remain positive? This is from Lana again. How do you remain positive when a superior is having negative conversations more often than not? We've had a couple of people ask something similar. You know, how do you deal with your leader is low EI, but you're trying to run a positive mindset? How do you deal with that situation?
It's a common question. And again, developing your EI and being aware of how that triggers you. So when we talked about that cue behavior reward system, the cue might be, you know, that interaction that you've just had with your leader. You know, maybe it was a negative interaction, or maybe they said something or they did something. And that's triggered that sort of behavior in you. Now, if you're that sort of self-awareness of, oh, he makes me feel like this, or now I feel like that, is the first step. And the second step is then to really not allow, and I know that's hard, it takes some time, it takes some practice, not allow somebody else's opinion to make you feel anything. You know, take the information on board for what it is. You can't control other people, and that's the whole thing. All you can do is try to influence them by hopefully giving them some feedback. And it might be, for example, someone's giving you some feedback in a, or your leader's giving you some feedback in a, you know, unhelpful way. So what can you do? You can ask them questions. You can say, tell me more about that, or what do you mean by that, or what could I be doing instead? And use it as an information gathering exercise, so you can take what you can do forward. Now that takes some confidence and then takes some doing, but as you develop your own emotional intelligence, you develop your ability to deal with that emotion that's come through that interaction in a much more perspective, clarity way. So you look back at what you stand for and go, is there truth? Is there some value in that? Should I hear some of that? And now what do I do? Or that doesn't sound like me. Can you please give me some more information? What makes you think that way? What can I do differently? So it becomes something that's practical and helpful and useful, rather than either it's throwing that away as unhelpful or unuseful based on the method of the communication rather than the actual, you know, content.
Sure. Yep.
But you can't change people. You can't change people.
No, you can't change people. No.
You can't control people. People do what they do. You can ask them to do something different. That's the only control that you have.
Yeah, it's the old horse to water analogy, isn't it? You can bring a horse to water, make them aware of how you're feeling and how they're impacting on you, but you can't make them change unless they goes back to your final slide, really, at the end of the day. Yeah. They've got to take the action, doesn't it?
Can only influence, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So just time for one more question. Talked a lot about how as a leader, your impact on your staff's performance can be influenced by having a positive mindset, breaking your values, etc. I think it's more and more commonly is that staff performance get impacted by outside of the workplace. And obviously the happenings in their personal lives, you know, might be upset the state of the world, etc., etc. What can we do as leaders to minimise that impact, I guess, would be the way to put it. How do we make sure they keep performing even though there's all this stuff swirling around outside of their professional life that might be having an impact on the workplace?
Yeah, you got to focus on the person first. There's no point focusing on the work or the performance without focusing on the person first, really helping them to do the same thing that you would do when you're looking at what's triggering you and what does that mean and what can you do about it now, but really coaching that in somebody else, helping them express the impact that their current personal life is having. You don't need to know all the details if they don't want to share all the details, but you can help them identify for themselves the impact it's having. So help them gain that self-awareness for themselves, and then give them some tools or some actions or some strategies that they can use, not to get rid of what's going on, because that's not the point. That what's going on for them is always going on for them, but some tools so that they can recover while they're at work. I think that's really important. It's been demonstrated over and over again, particularly when people are experiencing, a low mental health or mental health challenges, that work and focusing on work can be really therapeutic. It can be really beneficial. So it's not about negating it, it's about expressing it, helping them realise that, and then finding ways to refocus at the time when they're at work, as it does help with their mental clarity as well, and gets them to focus on doing something, and particularly if the things that they're doing they're proud of. I often say when, there's one part of our life that's draining, I like to think of things as cups. If there's my work, personal life is a bit draining at the moment, the cup's a bit low, it's not very full, then I need to fill it up somewhere else. And work is really a great opportunity to do that, to do something that helps you feel a bit more proud, feel valued in what you're doing, can at least counteract that a little bit. And as it says in the positive practices as well, daily positive practices, habits can also help deal with some of those stressors in a much more clear perspective. So you notice them, deal with them, and that, I also often say, that's 5 o'clock Gina's problem. At 5 o'clock, I'm going to have to deal with that, and it's not going away. But now I'm going to think a little bit about what I'm doing right now, so that later on at 5 o'clock or at 12:30, things probably be different, and I'll have to deal with it then.
Yeah, excellent, good stuff. Okay, I think that's it. That's all the questions we've got. So I can only say again, thank you, Gina. That was really good, really good. There's quite a lot to take away there and digest, and hopefully everyone who's watching today, even if you got one thing out of that, and that's what you go and focus on, that would be brilliant. That would be really good. So just to wrap up, just as a reminder, IML do run plenty of programs, and we've got plenty of professional development activity coming up. We've got a webinar coming up this Thursday. It ties in really nicely in terms of the webinar's topic will be reasons why your employees are leaving and what you can do better to keep them. We have another webinar coming 7th November, 5 ways to build your self-awareness. Again, feeds in really nicely to the topic that Jen's spoken about today. And the other thing to remember is that a lot of what Jen spoke about today, the Johari window, I recognise that from one area, and that's from IML's Foundations of Leadership program and our Accelerate program, and we are starting to take applications for the 2020 cohorts of those particular programs. So, and if you do want any of the resources from today, please send an email to programs@managersandleaders.com.au. And we'll get those out. And just as a reminder, we'll be sending a recording of this webinar out today. So please feel free to share that with your colleagues you think you can benefit. Once again, thank you, Gina. Much appreciated. And thank you to everyone. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thanks, Jason. See you, everybody.